Hey everyone, welcome to another lesson in this Postman tutorial course. Today we are going to talk about a very popular music player which is Spotify. I hope most of you have heard about this because this is my favorite music player where I play most of my music. So today using Postman we are going to see how we can automate this Spotify music player. So we'll be creating a web playlist. We'll be adding some songs or albums into that playlist. We'll also see how you can do some more operations on the playlist, and also you can remove the songs from the playlist. Right. So all of these using the APIs which is being exposed by Spotify. Right. We'll be using Postman for automating this, and we'll be using the Spotify Web API or the REST API provided by Spotify for all the developers who want to integrate either their applications into the Spotify, or if you just want to play with the Spotify Web API, right? So which we are going to do today. So as I said, we'll be using the Postman, and for a change, I'm going to use the web Postman UI, right? So if you have been working in the old Postman interface, this looks a little bit different, although the major part of it is still same, but Postman has done some very good work on the UI side. Okay, so we'll see how this has changed and how we can work around this particular tool on the web interface. Now coming to the Spotify, right? So Spotify has got its developer console, and if you type Spotify developer, right? So first of all, you need an account on Spotify in order to access its web API, right? So create an account if you don't have already on the Spotify, right? So that's a normal account. I already have one. Then go to this Spotify for developers, right? So developer.spotify.com. Here you will find all the documentation. It has also got a console where you can actually play around the APIs, how they work around with their APIs, right? And there are a lot of other things. You can create your own application. You can see at different use cases, right? Or you can just discover. Okay, so coming to the dashboard. Okay, so when you click on dashboard, it is going to ask you to log in with a Spotify account, right? So that's the account which you have created on Spotify. So just click on login and it will automatically log in into your developer console, right? Now here in the developer dashboard, you have to create an application, right? So that application would then interact with a API automation tool like Postman. Okay, so I already have got an application which I have created, right? But let's create a new app for this particular video session. So let's give it a name. I'm going to call it demo music, right? So let's give it a description also. So we'll say um, demo music player, right? And click on create. So that will create your demo music application, right? Now, there are a few things which we require when we are interacting with the APIs, and especially when they are authenticated, right? So the authentication is what we require. And Spotify, um, it follows the OAuth authentication, right? So we need to generate a token out of different authentication mechanisms, right? So as you see, there is a client ID and there is a client secret, right? So we need both of them. Okay, and then if you go to edit settings, here you will see you can add a website if you want to. You can add the redirect URIs, right? And that's the most important part, redirect URIs, because that's where this particular URI will be redirected, okay, through Postman. So this is the Postman redirect URI, right? So auth.postman.io version 1 browser callback. So you need to add this into your application. So click on add, right? And that's all we require to change in this particular setting. Now save it. Okay. Now as I said, we also need the client ID and client secret, right? But first, let's go ahead and create a new collection, right? So let me go to the My Workspace, and you'll see all of the different sections are now listed on the left-hand side, right? Collections, APIs, environments, mock servers, monitors, and history. Okay, so there's a different section for environment as well. Now, let's go ahead and create a new collection here, right? I'm going to call it Spotify. Now, under this collection, let's add a request, right? So we need a new request here. But before that, in this collection, we need to add the authorization. So let's go to Authorization tab, and here I'm going to select OAuth 2.0, right? Now that's what we want to generate a token, right? Currently, there are no tokens, as you can see. So there are different grant type for this authorization, right? So there's authorization code, implicit password credentials, grant credentials, right? But we'll stick to authorization code. Okay. Now the next part is the callback URL, right? Now this is the same thing which we set in our application, right? Which is the redirect URI. You need to use the same URI in your callback URL. Okay. Now, if you're working on the Postman web, you don't need to set it because it's already set, right? But if you are using the Postman desktop agent, right, then maybe if it is not set, you can set the URL to the same value. Okay. Now, coming to the next sections, which is client ID and client secret, right? Now, this is already available when we had created our application. So let's go ahead and add this here, right? So client ID, and we have got client secret. Okay. Now it is telling us that use variables instead to keep sensitive data secure, right? So it is not advisable to directly paste your values here. You can convert them into variables, right? So as you can see here, it is telling me to set a new variable. Now I can do that. I can say client secret, right? And I will say collections Spotify, right? Or I can create an environment. Now that's the better way of doing it. So let's go to environments, and we'll create our first environment here. We'll call it Spotify, right? So we'll add all our variables under this environment, right? So let's add our first environment variable, and we'll call it client ID, right? I will set the current value. So let's go to our application and copy this, and I will paste it here, right? Now the next thing is client secret. Okay, so come here and take the value, put it here, right? And save it. Now let's go back to our collection. Okay, now instead of this value, what I'm going to use is a variable which is client ID, right? So the reason it is not showing here is we have not selected any environment for this collection. So let's create or select our environment which we have specified, right? Now you can see the variable here, right? So that's our variable client ID. So the next variable is client secret. So let's go ahead and access it. I cannot see this here. So let's go back to environment, and there is a small spelling mistake here, right? So it is client secret. And let's save this. Let's go back here, and now we can see both the variables. So I will say client secret, right? Okay, now you can see it is showing the variables, right? And with the values. Okay, now what is left? So we have got the access token URL, right? So this is the access token URL, and let's go back to our developer dashboard, And on the documents, you will see there is web API, right? Quick start guides and reference. You can go there and you can find this web token URL. Okay. So that is authorization guide, right? So it is showing how you can get authorization for your application. Okay. So what is the flow? It has also given some examples how you can do it through the code, right? And you need to register your application and follow one of the Spotify authorization flows. So there are four authorization flows, right? So you can do it through client credentials, implicit grant, authorization code with PKC, or authorization code flow, right? So let's go with the authorization code flow, okay? And here it has provided you the complete flow, right? So this is the application which is requesting authorization to access data. It goes to the Spotify account service, right? It displays all the scopes, and then it goes to the user where it logs in, authorizes the access, and then the request access and refresh tokens are generated, right? So that's how the authorization works in this complete flow. Okay, so there are different flows which you can follow. Now, here is the request, right? So accounts.spotify.com/authorize, right? So this is how you can authorize your application. Okay, and then I was talking about the token, right? So this is the API token endpoint, right? So https accounts.spotify.com/API/token, right? So this is the URL, and that is what we have used here as well. Okay, so this is the token URL. Now the next thing which is required is the scope, right? And we also require the auth URL. So let's put that back here. Okay. So accounts.spotify.com authorize/authorize. So which we already saw here, right? So this one. Okay. So this is the authorize URL. So which is the auth URL. And the last thing we require is the scope. Okay. And the scope also you can find in this development guide. Okay. So there are different scopes as you can see. Now, every API request will have its own scope, right? So better to give it a universal scope, which can apply to all the different API requests, right? So for me, I have picked up all these three scopes, but you can choose your own, right? So I have picked up playlist modify public, playlist read public private, and playlist modify private. So all these three scopes I have added to my collection, okay, which is the Spotify collection. So let's go ahead and save these changes, right? So these are all the different parameters which you need to provide in order to get a OAuth token from the Spotify web API, right? Now let's see if we are able to generate a token or not, right? So click on get new access token and it will go here. You need to click on agree, okay, and then it will start creating your token, right? So authentication complete. This is the screen which will show you. If you click on proceed, you will see a new token has been generated, right? So this is the access token and this is the refresh token. Okay, the token type is bearer. It expires in 3600, right? So that's the expiry time and this is the scope of the token. Now I can click on use token, right? So that access token will be added to my collection. Okay. Now under available tokens, you will see there is a new token for me through which I can access my Spotify API, right? So that's how you can generate your OAuth 2.0 access token. And once it is generated, now whatever requests you add under this collection, it will be applicable for all of the requests, right? So let's go back to our collection and let's try out a new request which can get us some or through which we can access the Spotify web API and we can get some collection of songs, which is a new collection of songs or anything, right? But let's first see what are the different APIs which are available with the Spotify. Okay, so what we can do is let's go to console, and here you can see there are different APIs listed here, right? So let's start with the browse API, right? So there is a collection of APIs here. You can get a list of browse categories, a list of featured playlist. So let's go ahead and get a list of new releases, right? So songs which are newly released for the Spotify. So let's select this new releases. Okay, and on this page you will get the console where you can also send a request to the Spotify API using a token, right? OAuth token, and any other parameters which are required for this request. So this is the endpoint URL which you can use. The HTTP method is get, right? OAuth is required. So let's go ahead and paste the URL here, right? And save it. Now we need to make sure that our authorization, it is inheriting auth from the parent, right? So that's how it will automatically apply the authorization to all the requests in your collection. Okay, come back to parameters. As you can see, there are no mandatory parameters here. Obviously, there are some optional parameters which you can set. Okay, but let's go ahead and send this request and see whether our token is working correctly or not. So we have got a status 200 OK, which means our token is working, right? Now, if I say no auth, okay, and send this request, you will see the status is 401, which is no token provided, right? So that's a error. So without OAuth token, you cannot access the web API for Spotify. Okay, so let's change it back to inherit from auth, and let's send it again. And this will return us a list of different albums which have been newly released in Spotify. Okay, so you can see this is the albums. Inside this there are different items, right? Album type, single, there are different artists. Okay, and there is a long list of albums which are released recently in Spotify. Okay, so this is how you can use any of these browse get endpoints, right? So these are get request, so these are not post request, so you will get something in response. Okay, so all of these APIs you can easily access using the access token. Okay, so go ahead and try all of these different APIs which are available here. I've shown you one, but you can try all of the different get methods. Now next, we want to see how we can create a new playlist in Spotify and then add our own albums, right? So this was a simple get request. Now we'll see different post, get, and delete requests which can be used with the Spotify API. Okay. Now before that, let me just rename this particular request, right? So this we can call it browse new releases, right? So that's our get request. And what I can do is I can create a new folder, right? Now you can easily categorize your APIs using these folders, right? So we can name it browse, right? So these are all our browse APIs, okay? And we'll put this inside this browse API. Now you can add all the remaining APIs get requests inside this browse folder, right? Similarly, I can have another folder added, okay? And this I will call it playlists. So this will contain all my playlist requests. So I'll call it playlists, okay? Inside this, we'll create all our requests. Now, first, let's go to our documentation, API documentation, which is present in Spotify and which is very extensive, right? You will get everything which you require to play around the Spotify API. And that's the one reason I really love this API. Okay. Now, coming here, you can see there are different console APIs, and one of them is playlist. And you will see all the different methods which are available in playlist, which can be used by you. Okay. Now, the first API which we require is to create a new playlist, right? And that's this one. Okay. And that's a post method. So click on this and you will see API reference, create a playlist. The endpoint is this, right? It's a post method and auth is required. You will also see an example here, right? There is request body. You can give the user ID and auth token to create your own playlist. Okay. So let's go ahead and get this URL to create our new request. Okay. So click on add request and I'm going to name it create playlist. Okay. And let's paste the URL here. As you can see, there is user ID, which is a variable. Okay. Now, what we can do is let's create a new variable inside our environment, which is Spotify, and we will call it user ID. Okay. Okay. Now we need to get the user ID and where you can get that. So go back to your Spotify application, right? So this is our Spotify application, and under your account, so go to account, right? In account overview, you will find your username, right? So that's your user ID. So copy that and come back here and paste it. Go ahead and save this. So that's your third environment variable, which is user underscore ID, right? Now let's go here and create playlist. And let's see what are the things which is required to create a playlist. Okay. So for that, you can also go to this API reference, right? Click on this create a playlist under API reference. It will give you all the information which is required for this particular API request. Okay. So the header is authorization, which is required. Content type is application JSON. Now this user ID is a path parameter. Okay. So it's not a query parameter, it's a path parameter, and you need to pass it as it is. Okay. And that's the thing which is required. You also require your name, which you need to pass in your JSON body. Rest all of the information is optional. Okay. So let's go back here, and as you can see, we need to pass a path parameter, and that you can do using this. You have to add colon. After this, you need to write the parameter name, which is user underscore ID, and you can see it is showing under the path variables, right? So this is the user ID, and that's the key which we have given in this request URL. Now we need to give the value, and we already have a parameter for that, right? So we'll use that. Okay, so that's how you use a path variable inside your URL. Now this is a post request, so we need to change it to post request type. Authorization is still valid here. It is inheriting from the parent, right? So go ahead and save this. Now this is going to create a new playlist, right? But now we need to also add a request body. Okay, so you can copy this sample which is given here, right? Go to your body, and here you need to select raw, okay, and type as JSON. Now paste it here, and you will see here there is name, description, and public, right? So in name, you can give any name, okay? So let's call it demo playlist, okay, and one. So this is my playlist name, and I will call it a sample playlist for demo. Okay, so this is my name and this is my description. Now, if I go ahead and send this request, it's going to send a post request and that's going to create a new playlist for me. Okay, as you can see, this is the playlist information which is returned as the response. Okay, now the easy way to verify whether it has created the playlist or not, just go to your Spotify application and refresh it. You will see there is a new playlist which is created. Now these are all the playlists which I have created earlier, but this demo playlist 1, it was created right now. Okay, so using your Postman automation tool, you can create a playlist using the Spotify API. So that's cool, right? Now that's how you can create your playlist. Now we'll see how you can add songs to this playlist. So let's go to the documentation and let's try to find which is the API which can add songs to the playlist. So as you can see, this is the post request which will add items to a playlist, right? Now this is the URL. We require a playlist ID apart from the URI, okay, to add some items to a playlist. So let's copy this endpoint URL. Let's go here and let's create a new request. So let's add request and here we'll say add items to playlist. Okay, and let's paste the URL, which is the API request URL, and let's change this request type to post. Let's save this. And as I said, we require the playlist ID. Now, if you go here, right, and send this, you will see all the playlist will have a unique ID, right? So this is the name demo playlist 1, but this is the ID and this is the ID which we require. Okay. Now either you can store it in an environment variable using a script, pre-request script or test, right, as a test script, or you can directly use it in your API request, which I'm going to do now. Okay, so let's go back here and let's see the API reference. Here it is again a path parameter, right? So what we can do here is let's call it a path parameter. So we'll call it playlist ID, okay, and we'll paste the value here. As I said, you can store it in an environment variable as well, okay. Now the next thing which we require is we need to pass a URI, which will be a album URI or a song URI, right? So let's go back here. As you can see in the API reference or the API, we need to pass this URI, which is in this format, right? Spotify track and then some random ID. Okay. Now, if I go to the API reference for add items to a playlist, you will see this is a query parameter, right? Or you can also pass it as a JSON body parameter as URIs, which will contain multiple URIs, right? If you want to pass just a single URI, you can do it. You can pass it in the query parameter. Okay. So let's do it that way. We'll call this URIs and we need to pass a value here. Okay. Now, how do I get a value which is a URI? So if I want to add any particular song or album, right? So let me select this artist, which is Alan Walker. Here there are different albums, right? Now, if I go to a particular album, right? In the URL, you will see at the end, there is this URI, which is part of this URL. So copy that and paste it here, right? So that's our URIs. Now, if you want to add multiple albums, just keep on adding these URIs, right? Now go ahead and save this, and that should actually send a post request to add items to our current playlist. So let's go ahead and send this post request. As you can see, the status is 201, which means it was created. It will provide you a snapshot ID, which is a response. Now you cannot make out what has been added into that particular playlist, but obviously there are different APIs through which you can get all the items in a particular playlist, right? So you can use those APIs. Now the other way to verify it is go to your or refresh your Spotify application and go to this playlist where you will see that this particular album has been added to my playlist, right? So this is how you can create a playlist in Spotify and also add different albums and songs to your own playlist, right? So you can create any number of playlists on your Spotify application using the REST APIs through Postman. Now, as you can see, the Spotify API is quite extensive and there are lots of things which you can do, out of which I have only shown you a couple of things. But obviously, the most important part is authorizing your API. After that, you can obviously play around all your different APIs for Spotify. I'll try to bring up some more interesting topics around the Spotify REST API using Postman in my next session.